Hi, I'm Dr. Sana Hashmi, and welcome to this week's Print Eye on China segment. So, this week in my column, I discuss the evolving Chinese discourse on India's policy towards China and the early signs of normalization in the relationship, if there are any. So, on September 12th, India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval met with Chinese Foreign Minister in Russia, Wang Yi in Russia. Following their discussions, Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs made an announcement in their press conference about the disengagement along the China-India border, especially mentioning four areas, including the Galwan Valley. However, it's interesting to note that India's Ministry of External Affairs readout did not have any mention of any latest round of disengagement, and in fact emphasized on the urgency of achieving complete disengagement in remaining areas. So, of course, this has been in process for a long time. This is not something that this has happened in the recent past. So, this discrepancy in narrative is something that reflects an ongoing narrative where China seems to frame the ongoing effort and the past disengagement effort as current developments, potentially to manage domestic and international perceptions about how the relation is changing between India and China. So, of course, I think there is no doubt that there are some developments that signal towards perhaps India giving somewhat leniency to China, but I don't think that that's a sign of achieving full normalization in their relations. And India's concerns with respect to China very much remains where it has been for the past 4 to 5 years. But we have also seen a notable shift in how Chinese analysts and media are discussing India China relations, specifically in the recent past. And I think this is primarily how the Chinese embassy in India and Chinese foreign ministry, they have been trying to form a different type of narrative from what we have been used to in the past 4 or 5 years. So the previously prevalent accusatory tone is somewhat, I would say, that fading. Of course, it's not that it's going to go away, but definitely we are seeing there is an attempt to kind of showcase that the relations are moving towards a positive trajectory. So Chinese analysts are now interpreting and I think closely scrutinizing India's official statements, and even Minister of External Affairs, Minister of Raksha Mantri's statement as sign of a willingness to attract Chinese investment and foster a more cooperative relationship with China. And there's a scholar, Chang Chia-tong, who's from Fudan University. He highlights that this improvement in India-China, the perceived improvement in India-China relation is long anticipated, and it's happening much later than anticipated and accepted. But it's definitely a significant development, which is driven by mutual necessity. Similarly, another scholar, Qian Feng from Tsinghua University, he notes that positive development in communication and ongoing negotiations on border issues between India and China could lay the groundwork for future collaboration and future normalization in the relationship. But despite these positive discussion and positive signs, the reality remains that relations between India and China are far from normal. And since the 2020 Galwan clashes, we haven't really seen a high level meeting happening between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping. And the ongoing tension has not only affected the ties between India and China, but has also dramatically shifted public perception about China and India, which has led to growing skepticism about China within among Indians and even in the strategic community and policy makers. And in fact, even in China, we are seeing that no matter what the narrative has been there and what kind of narrative the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Chinese Embassy in India they have been trying to push for. But there is definitely a sense of negativity around how India's Foreign Minister, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar is discussed and debated within Chinese media and social media platforms. And he's kind of considered as someone who has been the architect of India's aggressive or assertive stance towards China. So the latest trigger for this discussion was Jaishankar's recent speech at the Economic Times World Leaders Forum, where he said that India has a unique, special China problem that is above and beyond the usual China problem that the other countries in the world are facing. So, articles at platforms such as the Global Times have labeled him as a significant impediment, a major obstacle to improve India China relations. and even accusing him of aligning too closely with the United States and promoting a confrontational stance towards China. So, some Chinese commentators have also emphasized that while there might be some level of improvement in India China relations, there are figures like Jaishankar whose apprehensions and stances towards China are seen as hurdle to real progress in the relations. They also argue that under his tenure, India has strengthened ties with the US and other Western countries, leading to strained relations with China. And also, there is this perception within Chinese media and strategic community that India's focus on Russia has kind of faded. So this fixation on Jaishankar within the Chinese media and social media, and accusing him as the main obstacle for improvement in India-China relation, it highlights a significant misunderstanding of India's positions and India's policy towards China. So I feel that by personalizing the issue, by personalizing the differences and India's policy towards China and placing the blame on Jaishankar and Jaishankar's views on China, what China is doing is overlooking the fundamental problem that still even till date remains the unresolved border dispute and China's own reluctance to address it meaningfully. So China has successfully resolved the border dispute with 12 other countries over the past 70 years, but if and with India as well, it's actually feasible to resolve the boundary dispute if China genuinely seeks a resolution with India as well, and if they really want to engage with India, they have to do it on equal terms and on equal footing, and they also have to recognize the complexities of the situation with India. So ultimately, for normalization to occur in India-China relation, China has to acknowledge and address India's concerns. And I don't think there is the shifting of blame on Jaishankar and India is going to help China's cause in the long run. And I do believe that turning a friendly country, or I would say at least a neutral country, towards China into an adversary has been one of China's most important strategic miscalculations. So dismissing India's agency and strategic priorities will only deepen this divide. So I think China definitely has to change its approach. China definitely has to change its narrative with respect to India. And it's very important for China to recognize India's role as a key player in the Indo-Pacific. I think this is the key, and that's an essential point for lasting peace in India-China relationship. And I think if China really wants to have a cordial, normalized relationship with India, it has to understand India. It has to understand India's concern. There is no other resolution to the impasse that we are seeing in India-China relationship for the past 5 years. Thank you for joining me today, and then I'll see you next week. Thank you.